In the heart of Manila, the air was thick with the usual chaos of the city. Jeepneys honked as they squeezed past one another on the narrow streets, vendors called out prices for roasted peanuts and ballot, and children ran barefoot, playing tag in the dusty alleys. Amid all this life and noise walked Ely Ramos, an 8-year-old boy whose eyes carried more sadness than any child's should. He wore a faded t-shirt and slippers too big for his tiny feet. In one hand, he clutched an old rosary, the last belonging of his late mother. Only a few months earlier, Ely's world had been filled with laughter, warmth, and the sound of his mother's soft lullabies. But when illness took her away, his life turned upside down. Left with no father and no siblings, he was suddenly an orphan. The small community of Quiapo, where Ely lived, tried their best to comfort him. Neighbors sometimes offered food or let him sleep in their homes. Yet no one could replace the gentle touch of his mother's hand or the way she prayed over him every night. Despite his loss, Ely discovered one way to cope: singing. His mother had taught him to lift his voice to God whenever he felt afraid or lonely. One evening, sitting near the Grand Quiapo church, he began singing softly, tears slipping down his face as he poured his grief into the melody. His voice was fragile yet incredibly pure, echoing like a prayer across the busy plaza. People walking by stopped. Vendors fell silent. Strangers stared, astonished that such a small boy carried such an enormous depth of emotion in his song. One woman, Aling Maritz, a street vendor with a kind heart, recorded Ely on her phone. She uploaded the video to social media, and in just a few days, it spread across the Philippines. The orphan boy who sings to God, people called him. The video reached beyond Manila, beyond the islands of the Philippines, and soon landed in front of producers from America's Got Talent. When Ely was contacted for an audition in the United States, he could hardly believe it. He had never even ridden an airplane, let alone dreamed of stepping onto a stage broadcast worldwide. With the support of sponsors and community donations, arrangements were made for his journey. At Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Ely stood by the departure gate, staring out at the airplanes lined up on the runway. Clutching the rosary tighter, he whispered softly, "Mama, this is for you." The flight itself was a wonder. Ely gazed out the window at the sea of clouds, imagining his mother smiling at him from heaven. His nerves trembled, but his faith steadied him. Somewhere across the ocean, in a massive theater, judges like Simon Cowell and millions of people were waiting. Ely didn't know if he would win or lose. All he knew was that he wanted to sing. Not for fame, not for money, but as a prayer to God and a gift to his mother. His journey had only begun. The lights were blinding. The stage was enormous. Ely's tiny figure stood in the middle of it all, clutching a microphone that felt much too big for his hands. The large letters of AGT glowed behind him, towering like giants. He took a shaky breath, staring at the rows of judges in front of him. The crowd stretched so far back he could barely see where it ended. For a boy who once sang to a handful of passers-by in Manila, this was an entirely different world. Simon Cowell leaned forward, squinting as he examined the boy. Sofia Vergara gave him a soft smile, while Heidi Klum waved encouragingly. "Hello," Simon said, his voice even but curious. "What's your name?" "My name is Ely Ramos," the boy replied, his voice quiet, carrying the lilt of his Filipino accent. "How old are you, Ely?" Heidi asked gently. "I'm 8 years old," he said, shifting nervously. After a pause, he continued, his voice trembling. My mama, she passed away last year. I sing to God like she used to sing, so I don't feel alone. The entire theater fell into silence. The audience's energy changed instantly. Some people gasped softly, others pressed their hands over their hearts. Even Simon, known for his tough critiques, tilted his head slightly, his expression softening. Okay, Ely, he said, his voice unusually kind. Take your time. Whenever you're ready. The music began, just a soft piano. Ely closed his eyes. His small chest rose and fell as he gathered courage. Then, his voice broke into the silence. It was not the powerful, polished voice of an adult. It was delicate, innocent, and trembling with pain, yet so full of truth that it shook the audience more than any big performance ever could. Each word carried a prayer. Each note sounded like a cry from a heart too young to understand death, yet strong enough to cling to hope. Ely sang about love that never dies, about faith that comforts, about longing for a mother's embrace that can only be found in heaven. As he sang, some people in the audience openly wept. A woman in the front row pulled tissues from her bag. A man bowed his head, closing his eyes as if he too were praying with the child. Even the cameramen seemed to hold their breath, afraid to break the sacred spell Ely had cast over the theater. On stage, Ely lifted one hand as if reaching upward. His eyes squeezed shut, his voice cracked on a high note, but he did not stop. Instead, the imperfection made it even more real. By the final line, the boy's voice was no longer just music, it was a plea, a message, a connection between earth and heaven. When the last note faded, silence held the room for a moment before the audience erupted into thunderous applause. People stood to their feet, cheering, clapping, crying. Ely opened his eyes, confused by the overwhelming reaction. His tears sparkled under the stage lights. He bowed shyly, whispering under his breath, "Thank you, Lord." Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, blinking slowly. His voice was almost a whisper to the other judges, "That wasn't a performance, that was a prayer." The confetti button sat on the judges' table like a shining possibility, but Ely didn't know it yet. He stood at center stage, wiping tears with the back of his hand, still trembling from the rawness of what he had just sung. The applause filled the theater like rolling thunder, echoing through his small body. Never had he seen so many people clapping for him, not on the streets of Manila, not anywhere. Heidi Klum leaned forward, pressing her hands to her heart. "Ely," she said, her voice full of warmth, "that was one of the purest performances I have ever seen on this stage. You touched every single one of us." Sofia Vergara nodded in agreement, her eyes glassy with tears. "You are only 8 years old," she said, "but you sing with the heart of someone much older, someone who has felt so much. You made us feel your story, Ely." Howie Mandel leaned closer to his microphone, shaking his head in amazement. "This is why we love America's Got Talent. Because once in a while, someone comes who reminds us what it's all about. Ely, you didn't just sing. You made us believe." Finally, all eyes turned to Simon Cowell. Known for his brutal honesty, Simon often made contestants nervous. Ely clutched the microphone tightly, waiting. The theater grew quieter, sensing something important was coming. Simon leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. His voice, usually sharp, was gentle. "Ely, I've been doing this show for many, many years. I have seen incredible singers, I have seen moving performances, but what you just did is different. This wasn't about hitting every note perfectly. This was about your heart. You sang from a place that most adults can't even reach. It was raw, it was honest, and it was absolutely beautiful. And Ely, your mama would be so proud of you. The boy's eyes widened, filling with tears. His lips trembled as he tried to smile. The audience began cheering again, sensing something magical was about to happen. Simon's hand moved toward the golden buzzer. The crowd roared louder, people rising to their feet. Ely gasped, covering his mouth with his hands as if he already knew. Simon pressed the golden buzzer. A burst of golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, raining down over the stage like a shower of blessings. Ely spun around in disbelief, staring at the glittering pieces that stuck to his hair, his clothes, and his small hands. He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed, clutching the microphone close to his chest. "Thank you, Lord," he cried, his voice breaking with emotion. The judges stood, clapping and smiling through tears. The audience chanted his name, Ely. 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 As if he had become a national hero. Simon walked onto the stage, kneeling beside the boy in the golden storm. He placed a comforting hand on Ely's shoulder and said softly, "You're not alone anymore." At that moment, the world wasn't just watching a talent show. It was witnessing a miracle, the story of an orphaned boy from Manila who turned his grief into hope, his loneliness into music, and his prayer into a golden moment that touched millions around the globe.